Good afternoon, everyone. When I got a call from the team and they gave this topic, I thought, should I really take this up because this looks quite bookish topic, or I'll say more of a theoretical. But I read into the details. I thought that there can be no other interesting topic than this because it brings you back on what do you study in economics and how do you correlate with tax. So I think it was an interesting topic to have, and I got a good panel members with me who will throw their views around it. To begin with, now what is a tax policy? When we say it's not just the budget or the tax laws that government makes from time to time. It's about what is the intention of the government to make their tax laws, the rules, and then how do they execute and implement those laws. So it's all covers under the tax policy of any jurisdiction. It has element of both macroeconomic as well as microeconomic part. When we talk about microeconomic portion, it talks about what should be the granular level changes, what forms they should be filling in, how easier it should be. And at a macro level, what is the intent? What should be the tax strategy so that the country's economy is affected in a positive way? So both taken together forms a tax policy, and that plays a very crucial role. We'll see to it how it is positively impacting, what are the long run challenges, but it is very crucial that a tax policy needs to be structured in a way that it has an impact on your country's economy overall. The other factor which came to my mind was the investment climate of any jurisdiction. So when we say investment climate, it talks about socio-political environment. While a country could have a good tax rate or good tax system, but politically it's not stable. There are frequent changes in the government. In that environment, no company or no investor would want to put their money. So investment climate is also very important. The another aspect of investment climate is, do I have a consumer base? I might have a country could be very lucrative from tax perspective, but I do not have consumer for my market over there. So why do I invest? So that investment climate is equally important when you look at a economic decision of any country. Moving forward, the other role which is played, which is a key on this aspect is the corporate tax rate and its competitiveness. Financial capital is highly mobile. You all will agree that anybody would want to have a investment in a country where its after tax return is more, maximum. When we also individually invest, we see, okay, will I get an exemption from capital tax, capital gain when I sell those investments? So after tax return is very, very important. Corporate tax is very crucial when it's a, and at some economists has even said that corporate tax is more harmful to a country's economy than the personal taxation and the indirect taxes, because indirect taxes don't pinch. The fundamental difference is it doesn't go from your pocket. You say, okay, I paid for this goods, so I paid taxes on it. That's it. But corporate tax, they are more harmful if compared to the indirect taxes. So that's said. Having said that, when we say that a corporate tax reduction is good, it is not a given. It is not necessary that every tax rate cut will bring a boost to your economy, especially in the long run. It could be a short term, but in the long run, it can hamper. Because if you keep cutting your corporate taxes, government will not have funds to develop the infrastructure, to bring more money for the public utilities, and it will slow down your economic growth in the long run. So beyond the point, we also would have seen that suddenly in 2019, our finance minister came and out of budget, they suddenly declared a corporate tax reduction, bringing it to 22%, which nobody anticipated. It played a role, but now there is no further reduction possible, because if we take further down, government will lose significant revenue. They will not be able to meet their spends. And again, you have to borrow money and continue the country. So it will not go in the long run. China also had recently done a massive tax cut. They lost about 4 trillion yuan they gave away. But now, what we also hear, while we do not have complete visibility, we hear that they are facing challenges in terms of continuing their economy. So, corporate tax rate reduction not necessarily will give a economic boost, especially in the long run. So, with this, I would like to hear from our panel member one by one. What are their ice-breaking thoughts around this topic? And maybe we start with Rinku.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here and looking forward to discussions with the fellow panelists. So corporate tax, again, and taxes, I think, as Pratik already said, they impact all of us, not just as corporates, but also as individuals. And I've also kind of seen it in play because, again, we are talking about tax competitiveness, the investment decisions that the multinationals or corporations make. So during my consultancy tenure in the US, we were working with US multinationals, basically who are working on expanding their footprint into other, all other countries. And one of the starting point, which, of the consideration or for one of the first questions which used to be asked, that, okay, this is my business plan, but what is, to start with, what is the statutory rate? So yes, the tax rate per se, I believe, has a direct correlation with the investment decisions, which in turn can impact the economic growth of a country. But at the same time, it's not just the statutory tax rate. It is also, apart from the statutory tax rate, the effective tax rate, which again, is a function of that what is the overall tax structure of a country. Again, when corporations, as you go into, a little more deeper understanding, it comes out that it's, even though the statutory tax rate might be slightly lower of a particular country, or it might actually be higher, but if there are any strategies and the differences in the tax regime which can be made use of for the, by the corporations, which can give them better after-tax returns. But overall, taxes do play a very important, aspect when it comes to the investment decisions. And with investments, obviously, they have a multiplier effect on the economy. So every investment which comes in, why today we look at even states are competing against each other within India. We are one country, and yet, there are uproars. Okay, I was expecting as a state this investment, and it went to the another state. So why is that? It is because the investment also fuels, it has a multiplier effect. It in turns would, churn the economy of the country, of the state, leads to better spending power of people, which again will go back into the economy. So it's a very relevant topic in my view. Thank you.
Thanks, Rinku. Sandeep, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks Pratik for giving the opportunity. I also like to thank Empiric Business Media and all the sponsors of this seminar to have invited me here to speak. Well, I would like to speak on a forward-looking perspective in terms of ideas for empowering tomorrow's taxation, and also have a view on how we can impact our economy in terms of socio-economic changes as well as fiscal sustainability. So before I begin, I'll just like to broach on two ideas. One is the current legislation that we have on leave travel allowance, and second is a possible, policy that can be made out of the big fat Indian wedding. So these are some two ideas I just like to speak with the audience. So first, I'd like to ask a few questions, just two questions. How many of you have visited Taj Mahal, Agra, and Goa? Okay, quite a few. How many of you have visited Northeast? Okay, in this audience there seems to be proportionately good majority, a good minority. But yes, normally if you see, Northeast India has largely remained a far-off place. And why I'm saying this is because we have this leave travel allowance, which we get 2 breaks in 4 years. That's the law, 10-5. And then essentially what you have is there's a huge tourism industry. So I'll give you some data and statistics before I talk about my proposal, which I had actually published in a few newspapers a couple of years back. So what happens is, India usually gets around 6 to 7 million tourists every year from abroad, and we ourselves travel around 25 to 26 million people travel abroad. So we're a net foreign importer of foreign currency. So what happens is, even within India, there are around 17, 18 crore people who travel on an annual basis. Now, you'll be surprised that the top state which the Indian tourists visit is Uttar Pradesh, and maybe possibly because of Agra Taj Mahal. But, Northeast is nowhere in the top 10. Now you see that government has spent close to around 3,37,000 crores on the infra development of Northeast only in the last 9 years of the Modi government. And if you calculate this year and next year, it will be close to around 5 lakh crores. So with this kind of investment outlays being laid down, I think what the government should do is they should give at least 2 or 3 lifetime deductions to Northeast, to people. They should also combine, the current deduction gives you only travel, but they should also combine the food and stay in the Northeast. So what happens is because of UPI and Digital India, anything which is paid through a digital mechanism should be allowed as a deduction up to a certain limit capping. We cannot say that whatever you spend will get deduction, but a reasonable deduction of 1.5 to 2 lakhs. Currently only employees get LTA deduction. Why? We could also extend it to professionals like who are registered professionals like doctors, CS, chartered accountants, chartered engineers, architects, because these are all people who have got disposable surplus. Now this disposable surplus goes in that net foreign imports that we do when you buy foreign currency to visit Maldives, Nepal. Nepal you may not need that much, but say you visit Southeast Asian countries, you visit any other country like Mauritius. So what happens is, if you give this deduction, this money which goes out will possibly funnel at least once people would like to go and visit Northeast. They will also like to ensure that, the integration also happens. When does an integration happen? Only when people mingle together. Today, at least I was not knowing what is the difference between a Kuki and a Meitei tribe till unfortunate incidents happened in the early part of this year. But when we know about various communities within India in the mainland, but to that extent, we are not aware about the Northeast people. So cultural integration also would get promoted. It is a left pocket, right pocket mechanism for the central government where you give deduction to the mainland India, you create taxpayers in Northeast India. So these are the ideas for the future. So this is one. I think if this deduction gets implemented, a lot of economic boom and the usage of infrastructure and collection of taxes also will start happening from the Northeast region. The second part is the big fat Indian wedding. Now, all ideas have come in papers. The big fat Indian wedding is related to women's empowerment. This idea was also appreciated by an very senior woman police officer and an ex-governor, you can guess the name. So, and she retweeted it on Twitter as well as on LinkedIn. So the idea is like this, that when a girl gets married, of course, nowadays, even from the educated class, normally is a 50-50 or maybe both the boys and the girls' families spend. But usually the burden is more on the girl's side because the lady has more expenses in terms of bridal wear, in terms of jewelry, in terms of beauty parlor, whatever, etc. Now, most of these expenses are not VAT-able because of 17(5)(b), because of your block credit. Now, what happens is, if the marriage expenses today are mostly in cash, except for the banquet hall and the room rents, which will have to be paid by bank. Most of the contractors who are mandap decorators, priests, beauty parlors, you can pay cash and get away. So most of this is a $50 billion industry, marriage.
Right.
If this industry is able to garner and bring a lot of money into the white system, into the bank system by emphasizing on Digital India. So anything which is paid through digital, the girl can get a deduction, a weighted deduction, not to the extent of the expenditure, because there are some fathers who spend 600 crores, the #1 family of India. But I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about middle class, upper middle class people, or even people in the villages who have to spend a fortune for the daughter's marriage. Now what happens is, traditionally it is known as a paraya dhan, but I look at it as an opportunity for women's empowerment. How it can help the women's empowerment? Because when the girl gets married, she should get a deduction which should be carried forward for 5 years like a 35D. So this is ideas, okay? This is not law, but this is what we have to propose. So this is a tax asset that the lady carries. So, I went to a G20 seminar where it was on women's empowerment, and somebody said that, in India, women don't get capital. So this is your capital. You have spent, your family has spent on your marriage. You will not get the entire money what you have spent as deduction, but whatever you have spent by check. And today through Aadhaar and many other linking that you can do on the digital side, all this can be digitized. And it is a one-time deduction, so you will not get it very often. just on the lighter side. So when all this thing happens, this deduction can happen. It is like a tax asset in the hands of the lady, and it will lead to very good, capital in the hands of the woman in terms of starting her own business where she can earn income and set off this deduction against that income. And that is the idea which was published, and I think we should look forward to such ideas to influence our tax policy and also influence socio-economic behaviors leading to infrastructure as well as fiscal sustainability. That's my view on this subject.
Right, so Sandeep, very, very interesting analogy on that.
Thank
I think
you.
I must read that paper whenever you have time. Please share that. So very innovative also.
Thank you.
And moving to Mukund, your ice-breaking thoughts on. Sorry, moving
Hello. Yeah, thanks for calling me to just give a view on the corporate tax and tax policy, fiscal sustainability. Basically, what we have discussed in our first, what Ringu is explained about the corporate and personal taxation, unless and until there is a positivity in the or competitiveness of taxation in India, no one come into the industry or no one come into the India as a economic growth. So for economic growth, we required a competitiveness taxation point of view. What Sandeep sir says regarding the sustainability part, not on the two factor what he has declared. Apart from that, there are a lot of benefits we can given to the industry. What kind of facilitated we have given to the personal or individual to spend money in a right way, and that to be converted into tax, which is a revenue part to the government. Now, whatever is into the cash expenses, that is a leakages for the government. That is not going to count as a revenue, and that is a tax evasion. So that tax evasion, if we need to capture or that leakages we need to stop over there. So we need to give benefits to the individuals, or we need to initiate certain benefited or certain things published in the public domain and get benefited for the individuals as well as the corporate life.
Thanks, Mukund. Moving to Pankaj, would like to know your initial thoughts around it.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me. So in terms of tax policy, what I feel is this, that obviously, I mean, in a business, they don't take a decision only based on tax policy. They'll be taking a decision on multiple factors. But tax policy does play a role in terms of driving the money into the right direction. For example, in our case, we have seen where sustainable architecture is something which the government is focusing on. Denmark, Sweden, Norway have given additional tax breaks for moving away from this emission norms and moving to better emission norms. So we as a company are now investing into ships which are working on methanol, which was until now never heard of. We also have ships which are battery powered, I mean for a shorter duration, but battery powered. So they run for a shorter duration on battery power. So this is possible because the government is ready to give tax breaks over and above the normal tax breaks. So this is something which I think as a tax policy they can drive and focus and get people to kind of look into other areas other than the normal thing, which is like increase the tax or decrease the tax or something like that. So this is something which I think is a lever. Other than this, I feel that tax is generally seen, I mean, when you want to increase or decrease the inflow of money on tax, people think about increasing the percentages, like you mentioned a few examples. But I think it has to be, there is an opportunity to sync it up with where the economy is going. So if the economic consumption is going up, focus more on that area. If the spend on infrastructure is going up, then maybe real estate taxes would be a better focus area rather than just increasing everybody's income tax rate
Yes.
and getting money on that.
Right.
So that I think are a few of the ways in which it can be different.
Yeah, thanks, Prashant. That is useful. Moving to Bhavesh, your initial thoughts on the topic.
Hello, yeah, I'm audible. Thanks for giving me opportunity. And Sandeep ji, I've been to Northeast India. Those who are adventure travelers must visit Northeast India, whether the tax benefits available or not, but it's very beautiful. So coming to the discussions, what I understand, we have talked about two things very frequently about this tax policy and the financial stability. So just thought, what is a tax policy? What is a tax policy? So from the government point of view, it's nothing but a collecting a revenue. Right, that is the intention of the government to collect the revenue. Now, there are two ways to do these things. One, either you increase the rate of tax or broaden the tax base. As Pratik mentioned few minutes before, that increasing a rate of tax beyond a certain limit may not be feasible. So what the government is doing, and since morning we are hearing digitizations, all APIs and everything, so capturing each and every rupee which is flowing as an income to capture as a tax. I remember a few years before, when we used to we invest in some of the equity shares of the company, and we used to get a dividend of 1,000 rupees, 500 rupees, 1,500 rupees. I often remember that we used to ignore that while filing of return. But now that option is not available. Now this time I have to pay 150 rupees for getting a dividend of 300 rupees.
Right.
And before that, the tax was not going. So just imagine that 150 rupees from a single taxpayers, the government is now collecting the huge amount of the tax. Now the concern is for what they are collecting this revenue. Simple, for the government expenditure. I think in the morning Anuradha mentioned that this is an investment for the well-being of a citizen of a country. That's true. So government is now spending a lot of money on infrastructure, developing the roads, infrastructures. From where they will get this money, from where they will fund this major capex, it's a tax revenue. Now coming to the financial stability. Now what is a stability? It's in government's ability to maintain the tax policies over a long period of time. So it can be, envisage properly what is the tax policies and everything. So that will be defines the deficit budgets, how much government can borrow the money, everything. Now how can we find out whether the government is stable or not? So best example is to look into the ratios of debt to GDP. How much government deficit is that, government deficit budgets, the forex reserves. These are some key indicators to find out whether the government stability is or not. So just to summarize that tax policy, fiscal stabilities are the must for any economic growth of the country and development.
Thanks, Bhavesh. Moving to Bhavna, I think you will have very innovative and different thoughts
So,
on this.
yeah,
From
so
that
very
side.
interesting to hear my co-panelists. And most of the suggestions has come on domestic law and, how do we look at Indian tax law and Indian tax policy. So maybe I will slightly digress in my opening remarks. So the topic also for today's discussion is global tax cooperation and, tax treaties. So I think I would like to mention about, the recent Apex Court ruling in the case of Nestle and others. And surprisingly, that has actually, the Supreme Court has changed the modalities of interpretation of tax treaties. The Supreme Court has held that union has executive powers, but the parliament actually has legislative powers. And that's really a path-breaking decision, if I may say. And the reason why is because the Supreme Court has held that even if there's a protocol agreed between two countries, still a notification by Indian legislature is required for the purpose of implementing that change. Now that, in my view, is substantial. It was in the context of MFN, and the treaties were, France, Switzerland, Netherlands, etc. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because as per internationally accepted principle, a bilateral agreement has to be respected. And the Supreme Court is basically saying that, even if there's a bilateral protocol which has been negotiated, however, Indian legislature has not notified it. Now, from the perspective of foreign investors, and when we talk about India policy, how is foreign investor looking at it? From the perspective of foreign investor, this is really, in a way, regressive, if I may say, because the basic premise of a treaty is that it is a negotiated text. It is something which is agreed between two countries. So the correct approach would have been for the government to be kind of, upfront on how the interpretation is going to be. Now, it would be very interesting, because this is a global community which is looking at India. It will be very interesting to see how these other countries are going to react to the decision, and whether our government will actually come out with a notification with retrospective effect. And these all are obviously impacting, in my view, this has a substantial impact from our FDI perspective. In fact, there was a number which was quoted in the press. The impact of this decision was approximately 11,000 crores in terms of tax. Now that really takes back some of the international, investors. And we are looking at, as a developing country, India is looking at really, really attracting a lot of investment and giving certainty in taxes.
Great.
Right, I think that's a very useful thought from an international perspective. Moving on, we all know that there are different tax rate in each of the country, and it differs. You have tax havens and then high tax rate country. Taking from there, so Rinku, what do you think that is there a competition between the tax jurisdiction, considering the tax rate, and if yes, what are the key pillars? And do you believe that this competition is really effective in economic growth?
Yeah, so I think in the current world where most of the economies are open, there is definitely a competition. Just like, I mean, businesses, we compete with each other. And why is that? Because, everybody, if in a monopoly you can't compete because you can dictate your terms. Similarly, earlier when the economies were not so open, there was not enough globalization. Each of the countries could have their own tax rules, though it was more confined to the domestic arena. But with the opening of the economies, this competition has increased. And in fact, if we look at some of the, data, even if I talk about the OECD countries, I think back in the early 1980s, the tax rates were as high as 50%. Now they, in recent years, they are at least 30% or less. We have India also as an example. So India went through the liberalization in 1991. Again, till the time it was a closed economy, we could call it our shots. Whether we were happy about it or not happy about it, that's a different matter. But with liberalization, India also saw the need that, okay, if we need to attract investment from outside, if we are, we'll be able to compete with the world, if we are able to rationalize our tax rates as well. And that's where, 1991, back in the day, the tax rates were about 45%. 2019, we actually went to 22%, and now we are saying that, yes, there is, hardly any scope for further bringing down the tax rate. So to that extent, there is definitely, because the economies are now open, in terms of the capital per se, or, the investment, the businesses have, almost like a buffet, right? So because with development, with advancements, again, some of the skill availability, resources obviously is a differentiated factor, but again, with globalization, the logistics are also improving. So to that extent, the businesses do get a wider, choice in terms of the destination of investment. And in order to be competitive, or in order to be, be there in the race, the countries are competing in terms of their taxes. And that's the reason we've seen that in recent times, there are tax reforms which are happening. In India, we've seen it. You just mentioned China went through a tax cut, right? So there is a fair bit of competition which is happening. Now, in terms of the competitiveness, again, it will differ from the business competition that we say, because there it is about who can produce, similar goods at a lower price, whosoever can sell at a lower price from a consumer perspective, they are, the better players. From a company perspective, whosoever can get a better return, they would be a better player. But from an economy perspective, it's not just businesses. It's a mix of businesses. We as individuals, we contribute to the economy as consumers, right? As also investors, because some of the money that we invest also go back into the economy. So to that extent, as per the Global Competitiveness Survey report, which the World Economic Forum used to publish till 2020, so there were certain key pillars which were identified. I will just name a few for the paucity of time. So the first one, which I think is very important one, is the institutional framework and macroeconomics environment. So the institutional framework, what is it? It is basically a set of principles and the overall environment in which not just the individuals, businesses, but also the government function. And tax regime will, forms a very important part of that overall framework. Because we've seen that, we've always talked about that when we talk in the context of international investment, we are rooting for a lot of FDI to come in. Apart from the tax rates, which we talked about, another thing which the investors look for is the fairness of the tax policies. the certainty on the tax positions, ease of, I won't say, to some extent doing business, but also doing compliances, because where the compliance cost is low, that, will give the businesses an opportunity to deploy more resources on earning and creating wealth. Right. Similarly, a related piece is the macroeconomic environment. So if we have a stable macroeconomic environment, inflation rates are stable, that also gives a bit of a comfort to the investors to say that, okay, there won't be any sudden changes, because again, the entire objective of tax regime, as Bhavesh mentioned, is to collect tax. And to collect and the tax collected is used for public expenditure. And if there, the inflation is really up, it is fluctuating. If that basically, because of that, the first thing if the government would go to is to change the tax regime, suddenly the money which I would have thought that, okay, I'll have out of 100, I'll have say 90 out of that pie to reinvest. And if the tax rate gets changed, again, the entire decision, the entire business plan can change. So to that extent, definitely these are two of the important pillars that play an important role in the overall competitiveness. Some other pieces, as Prashant also mentioned, in today's world, again, we are fast developing. We've been talking about technology since morning. And to some extent, we've also said that government is far ahead technologically in terms of data than us. Again, the point that how developed or how open we are in terms of technological development and abreast in terms of what's happening in the world in terms of technology, so that we are able to bring in changes or tax reforms or policies which actually encourage the investment in these new areas, because that's what again will attract investment. So these pillars are definitely very important when it comes to looking at overall competitiveness of as a country, when we are looking to pull in more investment, and that in turn will fuel the economic growth.
Right, thanks Rinku. So in your view, yes, jurisdiction do compete, and there are specific pillars which they use in order to be competitive.
Absolutely.
Thanks Rinku. Now, moving to Sandeep, and this question is to you more from its relevance, that we had angel tax provisions recently being introduced, and we think that it would have certainly played some role in our investment. So in your thoughts, what is the impact it has played in our country's foreign direct investment, and what correlation it currently shows?
Okay. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. So angel tax, as we all know, came in 2012, and it was exempting the non-resident transfers. So I think all of you are tax experts, so I don't have to explain you what is angel tax. So what happens typically is, government withdraw that exemption which was given for non-resident funding. Now, but then they later on retracted, saying that, you will get, some startups will get subject to certain conditions, caveats and all that, and also venture capital undertakings would get. And then later on 24th May 23, they came out with a circular saying that, certain investor categories, if they invest in you, like, endowment funds, pension funds, and, government, insurance companies, etc. and all, then maybe you will get some relief from this. But when you study the Indian company landscape, there are close to around 1.5 million active companies in India. Okay, out of that, close to around 70,000 are public companies, and close to I will say 7,000 listed BSE, NSE put together, 7,000 odd. So roughly we are talking about, even if I take startups, so as per the latest DPIIT report, there are close to around 1,12,718 companies by end of October 2023. And even if I take AIFs and VC funds, all put together is another 4,000-5,000. And if I take these investors who are going to invest, you say roughly around 500,000 companies, I give a discount. Still there is a 1 million companies, which are going to get impacted because of this order of the government that, you will have this angel tax. Now, traditionally, if you look back in the last 8-9 years, control compliance in our country has increased, and it has become very robust. It was not the case earlier. So, we have got plethora of good legislations that are there. Everybody files a Ben 1, Ben 2 today, in terms of beneficial ownership, everybody knows. FDI itself has got several rules in terms of automatic route, government route. FDI is a sectoral capping. There are a lot of Reserve Bank of India master directions for, taking the FDI in the correct way. We file a lot of files, FCGPR, FLA returns and all every year, correct? So I think the government is good in the sense that they have a valid point that, they want to introduce a check, that they want to prevent round tripping, or they want to prevent any kind of AML measures. But at the same time, I believe there should be some balance in form of a level playing field, where the other companies, because of some bad boys, shouldn't suffer. The entire herd cannot be called as a black sheep. So I think the government should retract this measure, but that would be calling for too much, because the other way to look around is to create a win-win, where the government can either say that, okay, fine, if you are getting money from FATF grey list or blacklist countries, then only these provisions would apply, or other way around is that you put a lower rate of tax instead of corporate rate of tax, because they have put corporate rate of tax which is ranging from, on a practical purpose, 25.17% to 34%. So another way, which we can solve this anomaly or this conundrum is, if the government today borrows, like government is coming up with a 10 trillion capex as per the 23 budget. Now, market borrowings form a very important part of this entire borrowing. Market borrowings come at 5%. If you know 54 EC, we all do some capital gain, we get 5% on the 54 EC bond with NHA or IRFC issues. So from that perspective, my proposal to government would be that, you should tell us that this premium, please keep it with you as a bond for say 3 or 5 years as a lock-in. Give us 1 or 2% as interest and give this money back to us. Because see, the money which is coming as a premium is not a free money, except for those black sheep cases. It is given as a control premium for board seats. It is given to implement when a startup or a company like a private company also, which is not a startup, actually has to invest in a lot of business building costs, has to invest in ESG policy compliances, and these all can be made mandated for these unlisted companies who have to face this anomaly. So that is, I feel there should be a win-win in this, where the government can impose these bonds as a way out, and this can be used for climate finance borrowings from the $10 trillion capex. That is one. Even on a legal standpoint, share premium is never credited to the P&L.
Right.
It is always part of the balance sheet in terms of reserves and surplus. So the RWITC case, which was decided in favor of Royal Western India Turf Club, which says that, entrance fees are like capital receipts. So I can apply the same analogy and say that, this is an entrance fee for an investor to come in my company. So it remains on my balance sheet. So I think there is a play out here, which I think we, consultatively, the various associations, bodies should work with the government and bring this out.
Yeah, right, Sandeep. So I think, yes, we agree that there is a missing parity on this particular aspect, which hopefully should come in near future.
Thank you.
Moving ahead, so Mukul, would you like to cite any practical examples of?
See, basically, I would like to just correlate the FDI and tax treaties.
Yep.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
So basically, while tax treaties. Hello.
Yep. Maybe you have to.
Hello.
Right now.
Basically, we need to understand why tax treaty is coming to the picture or taxation era. So what are the objective? So basically, objective is promotional of the cross-border payment structure or trades. Then you can say strengthening the economic, politics, geographical, you can say discussion with the diplomatics. You can say accelerate the inflow FDIs. These are the basic objectives of the tax treaties. That tax treaties, if it is not in line with the domestic laws, then what Bhavna says, Nestle example, if FDI, we are going to charge any unavoidable taxes or any huge taxes to the FDIs or investors, then no one coming into the India as a country. So basically, whatever is the objective we follow or whatever is the advantage we given to the new investors, that we need to give to them. So there are two models. One is the OECD model and one is the UN model. So OECD model, which tax treaty is having, they are given to the the next countries, or you can say investor countries, whereas the UN model is in the domestic laws, what we have called as a source country. So currently there is a today's news itself, India is going to convert from OECD to UN model.
Oh.
So that is one of the area. So that we need to see how it is work out with whether which is beneficial to the investor point of view. Second thing, what are the limitations of the tax treaties? One is a lower withholding tax, what we have given to the investors, that is loss of revenue in India. That is one of the limitation. As well as we are overriding the provisions of domestic laws and huge risk of the, you can say, revenue loss. So that is the limitations. So in India, a central government entered into the DTT under Section 90 of Income Tax Act, where there is a two tax treaties methodology, how we are going to take an exemption. One is the exemption method, which is particularly if it is income is taxable by one person, exempted to other. In other option, there is a tax credit method where both the parties or both the countries has paid two tax and one country is going for the claim purpose. So that the things what India is claiming or India has to initiate it for the tax treaties and which pass through to the foreign investor and called a lot of FDIs in country, that I can say.
I think it actually supplement additionally to what Sandeep mentioned. Moving on, so Prashant, my question to you would be again from a relevance perspective. How do we balance between a tax policy and fiscal sustainability? We have spoken about it in beginning, but very crisp. Any additional detailed thoughts on making a balance between a policy and sustainability?
Yeah, so I feel that from a fiscal sustainability and tax policy standpoint, obviously both these are linked, but somewhere I feel some people feel that whenever there's a fiscal problem, immediately they need to turn the tax lever. But that causes undue problems for people like us who earn and also the businesses also. So I think somewhere people, like I mentioned, I mean, what Rinku also mentioned, there we have to find out which are the drivers of the economy and link it with that and get the income from there rather than just putting a blanket increase or decrease. That is what one way. And also we need to look at how we can do it on a sustainable basis. I mean, we can't be increasing taxes beyond a certain point in a particular area also. And what some others mentioned about keeping it in a consistent manner from year to year, like every year you go a flip-flop, what he mentioned about that I don't think is a good way. If these basic things, which I don't think come under the tax, it is more of a, if I may say so, common sense, but that is something which will drive fiscal policy quicker and faster rather than getting into putting it under the tax hole. That is what I feel.
Yeah, always, whenever we see budget, we will expect that there will be changes coming in, and we see that. So I think that anxiety or excitement should reduce, and there should be other areas which should be explored. So thanks, Prashant, for that. Bhavesh, now no panel discussion or no seminar can be conducted without talking about COVID nowadays. So what are your views in terms of post-COVID world, how the tax policies have evolved and what is its impact for those specific changes?
So, before we analyze the tax policies, we have to analyze what had happened post-COVID and during the COVID. So, COVID was an unprecedented crisis which we have envisaged. So, COVID has changed the of hello. Hello? Yeah, sorry. So COVID has changed the business outlook in a tremendous way. So things which we were not thinking about, like work from home, meeting on Teams and everything. Giving an examples, today in my organizations, I am coming from a company who is an engineering company. We manufacture the heavy engineering equipment. So commissioning is a major activity for our company. And we have to visit the customer sites for doing the commissioning activity for the heavy equipment. So during this period now, it is a case study in our organizations that we have commissioned the equipment sitting in home only. So that's how the outlook of the business has also changed. And secondly, simultaneously from the customer side, the preferences of the customers, the behavior of the customer has also changed. Giving an example, you know, somebody has mentioning about e-commerce. Ladies here now started shopping on a mobile, Flipkart, hello, yeah. Flipkart, Amazon, Mantras, everything. This has grown up. Educations, which has also gone up. Yeah, during the COVID, there are many industry which hasn't hit, like, you know, hospitality, tourism, name and so forth. There are few other industries who have actually flourished during this COVID also, like pharma, medical, online educations, which is again a new trend which has come into picture. So now the question is whether this, after this COVID, suddenly COVID was going on and suddenly the economic crisis has come. I think in my history, I have seen first time that health crisis actually converted into an economic crisis. So whether this crisis was existing pre-COVID also, if you think seriously, it was there, but nobody was knowing. There was a structure problems, like, you know, aging population in some countries. There was a climate change positions, supply chain concentration happening, which were happening there, but nobody was knowing this. So what COVID has done, the COVID has actually exposed all these things all together and has actually impacted the entire industries and economic crisis as such. So it has impacted in such a way that global GDPs actually came down from the financial crisis of 2008. It was below than the financial crisis of 2008. Now coming to the policies, which is now the entire world is on thinking about policies to put all this economic growth again onto the track path. So all these policies, the freebies, and entire things which is happening, it is actually to push on the economy. So that's what the entire, the focus of the entire government is now on the putting of the economic track back into the growth. So all the policies which are going to focus on the growth, sustainability, and the equality will definitely give a boost to the economic growth. That's what my
Thanks, Bhavesh. So we are out of time, but last question, and I kept the toughest one for the consulting people. So Bhavna, how do you see tax competitiveness in the world of Pillar 2? And how do we achieve the cooperation in the competitive world when we talk about Pillar 2, which is quite recent and upcoming area?
So very interesting question, and I think I have maximum 2 minutes to answer because I'm seeing time's up, so I will not take too much time. So Pillar 2 is what the question is all about, Pratik's question. And as most of you would know, Pillar 2 is global minimum tax. It has been a breakthrough in terms of, you know, more than almost 140 countries agreeing to a minimum tax of 15% globally.
Right.
So that's a big one. And what has been agreed is a common approach. So under domestic law, the countries may or may not implement it, but they have to respect the law of the other country. There are these rules called GLOBE rules, Global Anti-Base Erosion rules, which are guidance, you know, for framing the domestic law. Now, coming to the question, what happens? So there is an impact on low-income developing countries. What is India? India is a lower middle income economy. That's what the World Bank says. So it is not the lowest, it is in the middle. But at the same time, it is a developing country. And I think like some of the my co-panelists spoke, the developing countries are thriving, they are recipients of FDI. They are not exporters of capital, right? That means that developing countries will give exemptions and incentives.
Right.
Corporate tax rates also. And I think, Pratik, you had alluded to this point that the collections are maximum from corporate tax and VAT. So almost 50 to 60% collections of a developing country would be dependent on, so there is a balance, right, that one has to make. The question is, will this affect tax competition? Today, there are so many countries competing against each other for FDI. In my view, the intention is not to stop tax competition. I think the intention was always of, you know, the global minimum tax to really challenge the fancy structures. So, you know, there were these fancy structures, and I think there were names like, I think something like a Dutch sandwich, or, you know, double Irish. And we all know Ireland has a 10% rate and Netherlands has a 12% rate, etc. So I think that was the intention. In my view, developing countries will probably have more avenues for FDI, possibly because the FDI which was till now going to some of these low tax jurisdiction countries would possibly, I mean Cyprus and Netherlands and others could possibly be attracted by the developing countries. Also, I think, something like offshore financial centers, which were attracted by these countries, possibly could move to developing countries. So there could be an advantage rather than a disadvantage. And I think to conclude, time will only tell how this all pans out. But from a cooperation standpoint, I think all the countries have to come together for this, a concerted effort. So that's my view.
Right, so in summary, what I heard is that the competition will continue even though we have Pillar 2.
Yeah, I think that would be healthy also, healthy competition.
So thank you so much, panelists.
Thank
So
you.
our time is up. If there are any questions, we can take it offline. And just for audience references, if you want to learn more about this topic, there is a good paper on the OECD website on the tax policies and economic growth. You can refer to it. It's quite detailed, but it is very interesting. So if you have time, you can go back and read through it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for patiently hearing to us. Thank you.